everyone, and welcome back to the New Year New Language Summit. In this session, I'm joined by Mara Lerner, who is the founder and blogger over at sololingual.com. And in this session, she's going to be talking about the reality of maintaining fluency without practice, how to avoid language loss over time, and what to do when fluency starts to slip. So it's not just consistency in terms of learning the language, of course. A lot of us are also considering how can we maintain those skills when we actually learn them, because obviously it takes a few years of learning before those skills become second nature, and then you don't really ever forget them. But of course, your level might decrease a little bit over time. And in the session, I'm also asking Mara a little bit more about her specific habits, the tools she uses, and how to maybe construct your daily action plan, a weekly action plan in terms of what tools you use. Because there are a lot of resources out there, and a lot of speakers, myself included, will share often a list of tools or many different ways that you can go about achieving your goals, whether they're related to speaking, grammar, or general language learning. So it can sometimes feel overwhelming to, oh, I need to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, when in reality, probably it's more about finding the kind of top ones for you. But listen to what Mara has to say about that. That's really interesting. And I'll see you in, oh, I almost forgot. Mara is also offering a freebie for every ticket holder. So to get that, just click in the sidebar. You'll say 50 fun ways to learn any language checklist. So that's another way you can kind of gather up your resources. And as an aside for Mara's here, you can also go to the swag bag in the top menu to see what every speaker has contributed. And if you're watching this in the future, way after the event, that is to say January 2025, the swag bag is obviously not guaranteed anymore. So that's probably not there at that time. But if you are watching this at the time of the event, then go check that out. Go get some of those freebies. And there's also a range of offers from the speakers and sponsors where you can get some really good discounts and bundle offers if you have the all access passes. So check that out. But in the meantime, go check out this presentation with Mara, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hello, and welcome to today's presentation on the reality of maintaining fluency without practice. Many of us know how challenging it can be to hold on to language skills over time, especially when life gets busy and we don't get as much practice as we'd like. So, today we're going to dive into practical strategies for keeping those skills sharp and share some effective ways to revive them if they start to slip. Whether you're here to maintain your fluency, recover a language you've started to forget, or simply prepare for the future, there's something here for everyone. So let's get started. So, what causes language loss? Well, language attrition happens when a language isn't actively used, and the brain prioritizes what's frequently practiced. So, less used languages fade over time. And the common signs include struggling with vocabulary recall, hesitation in speaking, and difficulty understanding native speakers. And language loss can start as early as a few months without practice, depending on proficiency level and how often you've used the language previously. But before we dive deep into the meat of the presentation, I just wanted to quickly tell you a little bit about myself. So, my name is Mara, and I started learning foreign languages back in 2011. And I am a college graduate from Sault College, which is located in Ontario, Canada. And I ended up earning my college certificate in language interpreting. And I'll be honest, I'm not a polyglot, but my goal is to eventually become one. And I am currently learning several foreign languages. I'm also the founder and blogger of sololingual.com. And I actually started my blog in 2021 to help people learn foreign languages. So, the first thing that we want to start with is preventing language loss. So, basically, having long term maintenance strategies. And you'll want to create that consistent passive exposure. And these three things are media consumption, social media, and reading. Now, specifically with media consumption, you'll want to listen to podcasts, watch shows, movies, or even follow YouTube channels in the target language. And this keeps you exposed to the natural flow and vocabulary of the language. If you use social media, you'll want to follow social media accounts or influencers who speak your target language. And this just offers casual daily exposure and helps keep you in touch with how native speakers communicate informally. And then, of course, there's reading. So, subscribing to news outlets, blogs, or newsletters in your target language to stay in the loop with current events while also maintaining your reading comprehension. You'll also want to incorporate active practice, even in small doses. So, these three things would be using language exchange apps, having weekly speaking goals, and of course, writing practice. So, with language exchange apps, you can use apps like HelloTalk, Lingby, or Tandem for casual conversations with native speakers or fellow learners. And even chatting a few minutes a week keeps your skills fresh. With having weekly speaking goals, you will want to have a set goal of speaking the language. So, whether it's a brief phone call with a language partner, a tutoring session, or even speaking to yourself in the mirror. And then, of course, there's writing practice. So, journaling in your target language or using language correction platforms. And this can help keep your writing skills sharp. You'll also want to rotate focus on all skills. So, this includes listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And you'll want to make sure to practice all four skills. I know that many learners overfocus on one skill, like listening, and then neglect others, like writing or speaking. So, it's really important that you practice and maintain all four of those skills. And then there's shadow practicing. So, you'll want to imitate native speakers by repeating what they say out loud, and this improves pronunciation and rhythm in speaking. There's also what they call dual language practice. So, some language learners use a dual language method where they say a phrase in the target language first and then follow it with a translation in their native language. And this self translation technique reinforces vocabulary and sentence structures while also building confidence in both expressing and understanding the target language. And then there's what they call code switching for practice. So, code switching typically means switching between languages in conversation. In this practice context, code switching is a technique where, for example, John will consciously alternate between Spanish and English. And this just reinforces his comfort with Spanish in a real world interactive setting. A really good example, I would say, actually, I have two examples for both of these practice techniques. So, for the dual language practice, I actually had a conversation with a gentleman not too long ago, and he's been learning French a little over 2 years, and his French skills started to slip. So, he decided to practice speaking French around the house with his wife. And one night he came into the kitchen and his wife asked him a question, and he responded in French and then translated that into English, which is his native language. And she sort of looked at him like, what are you doing? And so he basically explained to her that he was hoping he could practice his French speaking skills. And she said, well, that's great, but are you going to keep up with this habit? Well, interestingly enough, he did. I think within probably 3 months. The really interesting thing about this was that his wife ended up picking up the French language, and there is a term called comprehensible input. So basically, it's just listening and absorbing the target language, but you're not necessarily speaking, you're not reading. And she wasn't speaking or reading in French. She was just hearing her spouse speaking in French constantly. So she started picking up phrases, vocabulary. And the really cool thing about this in the end was that she immediately was inspired by her husband. So she ended up picking up the French language. And she's been learning French for about 6 months now. So now going forward, he's told me that him and his wife only speak uh, French around the house. So it's really helped them both tremendously in their speaking and listening skills. And then as far as code switching for practice, one thing that I've noticed is I see a lot of this in television shows, especially on Netflix, where you're watching a show and there's a scene with two people, and both people in the scene are speaking Spanish, for example. And then person A will then start to speak English while person B is still speaking to them in Spanish. And then person A will then go back to speaking Spanish, and then person B will start speaking English. And this is a common thing that I've seen in a lot of television series. So if you happen to be around someone who does speak your target language, try practicing going back and forth between the target language and your native language, and it will help you tremendously in the long run. You'll also want to take short language immersion sprints. So this includes scheduled immersion. So every few months, take a dedicated week or weekend where you immerse in the language as much as possible, treating it like a mini language boot camp. And this helps revive your skills if they started to slip. Then there's also language travel. So whenever possible, if you are traveling to countries where the language is spoken, you can certainly do that to practice your speaking skills, or you can even engage with native speakers for that full immersion experience. So, secondly, what to do when fluency starts to slip? Well, the first thing that you want to do is you want to identify the gaps, and that would be self assessment. So, you'll want to notice where your skills have deteriorated the most. So, is it vocabulary recall? Is it your grammar? Or is it understanding native speakers at a normal speed? You'll also want to focus on targeted practice. So, once you identify your weak points, you'll want to focus on specific skills. So, for example, if vocabulary is an issue for you, start using flashcards or apps like Anki or Drops to rebuild your word bank. You'll also want to embrace the humility of relearning. So this is accepting the regression. So it's honestly natural to feel frustrated when your fluency slips, but recognizing it early allows you to course correct. So don't hesitate to go back to resources you used at the intermediate or advanced levels to regain that lost ground. You'll also want to focus on small wins. So start with achievable tasks like simple conversations or revisiting beginner materials to regain confidence. And then once you're comfortable, you'll want to gradually increase the complexity of your target language. You'll also want to restart regular speaking practice. So, reactivating speaking skills. If speaking fluency has dropped, prioritize your conversation practice. Engage with a tutor or find a language exchange partner, even if it means scheduling just 10 to 15-minute sessions initially. This will help you a lot. You'll also want to simulate real life conversations. So, using role playing exercises like answering mock interview questions or explaining concepts just to challenge your speaking skills in various scenarios. There's also intensive refresher courses. So there's language boot camps or online courses. So you may want to consider joining an intensive refresher course, either in person or online, where you'll focus on practicing grammar, vocabulary, and conversation. So even apps like Glossica or Fluent Forever can also be helpful for having that structured review. And you'll also want to revisit key grammar and vocabulary. So don't be afraid to restudy grammar rules, especially if you notice your sentences are getting tangled. And two really great apps for this are Linguist and Closemaster, and they are very useful for reviewing context based sentences. So, thirdly, is you'll want to consider leveraging AI tutors for convenient speaking and listening practice. And AI tutors for real time practice. As we know, AI powered tutors are a flexible and convenient way to practice speaking and listening skills with no need to schedule time with a live partner. And some platforms that you can explore to uh, practice your skills with an AI tutor, you can use platforms like ChatGPT Voice, Teacher AI, Univerbal, JumpSpeak, LangoTalk, Talkio AI, LanguaTalk, as well as TalkPal AI. And these apps are excellent. They're becoming more advanced uh, over the last 2 years, I'd say. And the benefits for using an AI tutor, well, number one, you can practice at any time. So AI tutors provide that on demand practice, making it easy to stay consistent even with a busy schedule. Secondly, AI tutors can provide you instant feedback. So they offer real time corrections, helping you fix mistakes immediately, particularly in pronunciation and fluency. And then the third benefit is variety in topics. So AI tools simulate a range of conversation topics, helping you practice different types of discussions from casual chats to professional settings. And the great thing about the apps that I just listed, all of them, I would say, pretty much cover all categories. So you can literally talk to an AI tutor on strictly talking about music, film, art, comic books, health, geography, American history. It really doesn't matter. These apps literally can do it all for you. So, fourthly, you'll want to leverage technology to maintain fluency. And gamified language apps are really great. So, for example, there's Fun Easy Learn, Duolingo, Ling, and these apps can help in keeping language skills fresh through engaging activities. These apps also let you practice without feeling like you're studying, making it easier to stick with the habit. You can also use speech recognition tools. So apps like JumpSpeak, Speakly, and Busu offer speech recognition features that help you get that real-time feedback on pronunciation and fluency. And these can be incredibly valuable for maintaining improving speaking fluency. You'll also want to build a language maintenance routine. So, having daily micro lessons. So, even if it's just for 5 to 10 minutes per day of active practice, uh, this can prevent your language from slipping too far. So, apps like Beeling You app can be set up to provide daily bite sized reading or listening exercises. As well as space repetition. So, apps like Anki use space repetition to make sure you review words and phrases just before you forget them, keeping your vocabulary sharp. And then there's the mental shift. So think of language maintenance as part of your lifestyle. So, language maintenance mindset. So, you'll want to treat language learning not as something with an endpoint, but as a lifelong habit or part of your identity. And this reduces the pressure of being fluent and encourages long term consistency. And you want to incorporate into your hobbies. So if you enjoy cooking, for example, follow recipes in the target language. If you love reading, you can join a book club in that language. But basically, you'll want to blend your language use with your hobbies, and this keeps the language fresh and enjoyable. And also, you'll want to celebrate milestones and you want to celebrate your small achievements, whether it's understanding a podcast without subtitles or having a smooth conversation with a native speaker after some time off. So it's really important to celebrate those wins. And of course, when it's time to ask for help. So you'll want to hire a tutor. So if you find yourself stuck in a language plateau or significant fluency loss, hiring a tutor to guide your practice can be the most efficient way to get back on track. So, like I mentioned earlier, you can use apps like Lingby, HelloTalk, and Tandem, or you can use an AI tutor and use one of their apps to practice your listening and speaking skills. You may also want to join a language group. Participating in a language learning group or a conversation circle can provide the accountability and motivation you need to stay consistent. So, these are just some of the key takeaways. So, maintaining fluency without regular practice is challenging, but it's possible with the right strategies. And by blending passive exposure with consistent active practice and incorporating the language into your daily life, you can avoid significant language loss. And if fluency does start to slip, targeted and structured practice will help revive those skills. And before we wrap up, I have a special resource for you, a free checklist where you can discover 50 fun ways to learn any language. And this checklist is packed with creative, enjoyable activities to help keep you engaging with your target language regularly. It's a fantastic way to maintain fluency without feeling like you're studying. So you can keep your skills alive and thriving. And be sure to drop your email address, and then the checklist will be sent directly to your inbox. And if you'd like to stay connected, you can reach me on any social media platform. Just search for my handle at Sololingual. You'll also find more resources and updates on my website. And don't forget to check out my YouTube channel that I just recently launched, where I will be sharing tips, strategies, and insights on language learning. And I'd love to connect with you there and help support your language learning journey.
Thank you so much for that presentation.
Yes, well, you're very welcome.
And the big thing I had when I was going through was, wow, so many practical ideas and strategies for people to take in. So I really hope that people were taking notes as they were watching it. But for someone like me who's a bit scatterbrained, who's maybe a little bit disorganized,
Mhm.
uh, having a list of all these things I could be doing is a great for inspiration and new ideas. But do you have any tips on how I can build the language learning routine without being kind of overwhelmed or like, because it seems like a lot that I could be doing if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, first off, and I think I mentioned this in the last year's presentation summit. I did offer a free quiz on discovering your language learning style. And what I would say to people, even if you're, I guess, already at that intermediate or that advanced level, sometimes it still doesn't hurt to really hone in on what kind of learning style that you have, because everybody learns very differently. So you can be a visual learner, you can be more of an auditory learner. If you learn better by strictly reading or by writing, what I would say to people is to try a little bit of everything and see which works best for you and hone in on that. Yes, there's so many different ways that you can go about maintaining your target language. But I think if you really hone in on perhaps maybe a specific learning style, that might just be the right fit, because not everybody is going to maintain a language by, for example, like watching foreign films or foreign television shows on a platform like LingoPie. Some people may prefer to use an app like Glisten or Lyrica, where they prefer to maintain their target language listening to music. A lot of people like to listen to a lot of music. A lot of people like to listen to a lot of podcasts. As long as you are being consistent every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes or for 10 minutes, and even doing those things while multitasking. I know some people may not be the best at multitasking, but for example, if you are an auditory learner, you could listen to a podcast on your way to work in the car every single day. Or, people like to binge watch Netflix. So if you are more of a visual learner, rather than watching a show or a movie, every night during dinner hour or after dinner hour in your native language, why not be consistent in watching something that's in your target language? Because the more you maintain a little bit every day, you're not going to lose the language. And that's why consistency is so important. So, yeah, I would say it doesn't hurt to really discover your learning style, because with a learning style, that comes with finding, whether that's an app, books, or whatever things are in relationship to that specific learning style, and then honing in on it and being consistent with it every day. That's really the key, basically, because I think a lot of people don't really think about a language learning style, and everyone, like I mentioned, learns very differently. So yeah, really just find out what works best for you and then practice every single day.
Yeah, just put it in the calendar or just whatever you feel like it. Put it a part of your routine, something like that.
Yeah, there's actually a book that I read last year called Atomic Habits, and I highly recommend people to read this book. As a matter of fact, I don't remember the author's name, but he actually uses the example of learning Arabic in the book. And he talks about, and I mean, as we know, Arabic is not an easy language, but he does talk about creating habits with having a routine. So even if you do 5 minutes, and because I think a lot of people have this thought or this idea like, I need to learn for an hour or maybe 30 minutes. And if you can, that's great. But I mean, a lot of people have very busy schedules, they've got priorities. So if you can find time within your schedule to implement maintaining your language, that's the most important thing. And in fact, in the book, and like I mentioned earlier, he talks about finding like little pockets of time to practice your language. So, for example, if you're getting up in the morning, and you're a man, shaving, you could put a podcast on. Or for women that are putting their makeup on when they get ready for work, you could put music or a podcast on in your target language. Same thing with driving to work. You can put something on while you're on your way to work. So finding those little pockets of time can actually make a big difference. And when you do that every single day, that adds up. So yeah, I thought the example that he mentioned with learning a language in the book was very interesting.
Yeah, so just basically building the habit small and not doing too much of a commitment because that could also lead to overwhelm where you're just like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't feel like doing an hour today, so I'll not do anything today. And then, well, I didn't do anything yesterday, so I might not do anything today. Just,
Yeah.
you can get off the habit pretty quickly too if you're not careful.
Well, not only that, because for a lot of people, I think when they think they have to, maybe spend 30 minutes to an hour, and they think, oh, I'm not really in the mood for it. Then they get into a habit of not being consistent with practicing. And then, that's when if you fall off and then you start losing the language. But if you can do even just 5 minutes, there's this reward or this feeling that you get saying, oh, okay, like even if I did a little bit every day, I still feel better that I at least did something, because it's
Mm,
better than doing nothing.
right. And it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that you really ascribe a lot to this comprehensible input of getting just, a lot of hearing and seeing the language. So that's correct.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the more you can absorb the language, the more you'll pick up the language. In fact, in the presentation, when I talked about the example of the gentleman that I was speaking to, and his wife, she didn't speak French, but he had learned French for over a year. And then he had asked his spouse, hey, like, I know you don't speak French, but if I just speak to you in French and then speak to you in English, is that fine? And she's like, yeah, that's fine. she thought it was weird at first because she doesn't speak French. And then I think it was many months later, she started picking up French because she was constantly hearing him speak it.
Mm.
And so then that ended up inspiring her to pick up French. So now he told me that she's picked up the language. And now they've made a commitment that when they're at home, they prefer to speak in French first, and then if one of them doesn't understand what the other is saying, then they'll translate in English. So yeah, that's a really great example of just practicing with someone that you live with or a loved one, because through comprehensible input, they'll automatically pick it up, and I mean, you may inspire that person to pick up the language as well. You never know.
Yeah, it's a very funny story. It sounds very Canadian as well with the French and English.
Yeah, well, Canadian French or Quebecois French is very very unique compared to Parisian French.
Yeah, but you've got the whole like the kind of a story of two cities or two worlds in a way, and the kind
Yes.
of mix is very for anyone who's never been to Canada and experienced it, especially Quebec, of course. It's just unique, I will say, you know.
Very. In fact, I saw an interview on YouTube, and they had interviewed a Quebecer, and they asked, "Have you been to France?" And he said, "I have." And the Parisians over there found that Quebec French was a little funny, and they still could understand him, but there were like certain pronunciations that the Parisians had a difficult time understanding. So yeah, there's definitely some differences between the two, I guess,
Yeah.
dialects. So yeah, it's very fascinating.
I guess most people in, especially in North America, would learn uh, Parisian French anyway because there's just
Yeah,
so many more resources and you'd be understood in Quebec anyway. But yeah, I
yeah,
just thought it was really interesting when I went there in 2016. I always thought it was like, you know, bilingual, but
yeah,
it's really just two very separate groupings, it seems like, where there's, of course, a few people that speak both, but I was
yes.
very surprised to see how kind of hardcore each group was. I met many people who didn't understand me in English at all, and I don't speak French at all either. So, there's a language barrier there which I didn't understand. But yeah, that's that's an
Well, the
interesting.
other interesting thing, I went traveling abroad many years ago, and a girl, she was American, and she had asked me where I was from, and I said I'm from Canada, and she says, "Is it true that all Canadians are bilingual?" And I said, No. In fact, I would say Quebec really is the only province in Canada that strictly speaks French, because if you go to other provinces like British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, most people are not fluent in French at all.
Right.
English is a dominant language. I mean, yeah, there are some Canadians where, if you ask them to speak some French, they could speak a little bit of it. But yeah, Quebec is they're their own little world.
Yeah. It's like they were talking about independence a few years back. I don't know if that ever came to anything, but
I
I
remember
could
hearing about
understand
that,
it.
and I'm not sure what's going on with that down the road in the future.
That's really funny, but yeah. So I mean, that's also a decision you have to make when you choose a language, right?
Yes,
Which dialect or country's version is. You mentioned Arabic before. Obviously, there's a dozen of those
yes,
to pick from, and you've got the same with a few other languages, like Spanish, for instance,
yes,
one of the most learned secondary languages. Do you go for the, Spain Spanish, or do you go for Latin American Spanish, whatever that means, like Mexico
yeah.
or Colombia? So anyway, it's interesting to see a connection between the culture and the languages. And one cultural thing I also was curious about was you're someone who's been involved in both the independent side of language learning, but
Mhm.
also the kind of formal and academic side of language learning.
Yes.
How would you contrast the two in terms of getting results for an individual language learner? And did you take anything from formal, the academic setting that really benefited you on the kind of independent side and when you're doing your own learning outside of the curriculum?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think obviously with independent learning, The nice thing about independent learning is, again, you're discovering your own learning style. And there's, obviously a vast amount of resources that are available now than ever than it was maybe 20 to 30 years ago. In terms of perhaps if you could call it institutional learning, there is a set guideline. And I think what I've found, even for example, years ago when I got into language learning and I took up German, I took a night class. So it was a classroom setting. And, it's very traditional. They go by textbooks, they go by videos that they play in class. But the problem that I have is that they don't cater to the individual's uh, learning style. And so I think the problem that you see, especially among, if you ask a lot of students in high schools, especially in North America, and the two common languages that they learn in high school are Spanish and French. If you ask most students that come out of high school, I'd say about 95% of them can't even speak a lick of the language. And reason being is because they go by that traditional textbook learning style. And while that may work for some people, that certainly doesn't work for everyone. And I think the problem is that the traditional side doesn't always tend to focus on comprehensible input. And the other problem that I noticed, having experienced learning a language in a school setting, is they don't really get you to practice to speak or have the conversational speaking side of things. It's basically learning the grammar, the writing, and those things are all important. But the most important component that they leave out is the conversational side of getting you to listen and speak in the language, which is unfortunate. So, and then having taken language interpreting at a college institute, that was very interesting because they don't really focus so much on the language itself. They really focus on the criteria that goes into what is expected of an interpreter to do in the job itself. There's different aspects to interpreting. There's simultaneous interpreting, there's court interpreting, medical interpreting. So there are certain things that you have to learn when you are an interpreter in those different categories. So yeah, I think if I compare all three, I mean they're very, very different. Um, but I'd say to people, if you want to try going in a classroom setting, that may just work for you. I know some people who travel abroad, for example, in Japan. There are a lot of people who enroll in these Japanese schools to learn how to speak Japanese. And, some people make mention that there's a lot of really positive responses to that as opposed to the independent learning side. But the great thing about in today's age, with apps and with so many things that we can access compared to maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, I mean, this is really a great time to not only learn a language, but to maintain your language, which is nice.
Yeah, and you can even find classes in online too, so you can get kind of a
Yes.
little bit of best of both, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And any practical kind of lessons you learned from the interpreting that you've kind of brought with you to your future language studies or future kind of practice?
Oh gosh. Well, I think for people who don't know, interpreting is not is not an easy profession. Even when I was studying it at Sault College, um, it's well, for one thing, that you really have to maintain a level of confidence. Um,
What kind of skill is required? Sorry, I'm just breaking in here.
mhm,
Like when you see, of course, the interpreters that we see are like the politicians' interpreters and things like that.
yes.
So we don't really see court interpreters or medical interpreters. But in general, is there like how good do you have to be in the language? Is there because you can write things down or have notes or something, so you don't have to be like perfect, or what's the skill level that they aim for?
Yeah, so I did remember learning years gone by. They actually gave this little tip. For example, if you're doing court interpreting, because they're saying so much, one of the tips that they do give you is to, well, for one, always have a notepad and a pen. And they actually recommend writing down short form notes, but writing down the most important things to whatever that person is saying. Because obviously, your brain is like working on such a strong mode of like paying attention, then you have to interpret the most important points to the other individual. So writing down the point form notes, and then once you've gathered down all those most important notes, it's really up to you as the interpreter to form sentences or kind of relay the message to the other person with those most important points. So
Mm,
rather than saying everything that the person said, if you can remember down, or at least remember and write down the most important things that the other person needs to know, that's really the whole point, the main goal. That's your main goal, to relay the message across to the other person, and so forth, going back and forth. So that's one of the big things that I learned about court interpreting. I know that medical interpreting is a little bit different, because there's a lot of medical terms. And I would say with interpreting, you really have to be proficient in the language
of
itself.
course.
And
Yeah,
not
yeah.
only that, if you are wanting to, specialize in interpreting in a courtroom setting or medical setting, obviously there's more vocabulary that goes along within your target language for those different types of workplace settings.
Absolutely. And would you say that interpreting in terms of all the language education that's available in the formal system, do you think that's the most practical? Because I've heard many stories of people doing more general language degrees, perhaps intended to teach or become a teacher in the home country. I've often found that they struggle to actually produce the language when they graduate, even though
Mm.
they can almost perfectly translate, perfectly answer any grammar questions, or but then you try to have a conversation and then they just can't speak because obviously that's not prioritized highly. Do you think that therefore in the interpreting degree, because speaking is such a big part of it, that actually if you're looking for practical language skills, that could be a good choice? If you know you're interested in languages and you might want to do it as a career to some degree.
Yeah, I definitely feel that it is more practical. There are a lot of job opportunities in the interpreting space. And, it really comes down to what type of interpreting you want to do. If you prefer to do the courtroom setting interpreting, or if you prefer to do medical interpreting. Um, and then, of course, there's simultaneous interpreting. And then as well, I know that there's the UN. As a matter of fact, if a really good movie recommendation is The Interpreter with Nicole Kidman and Sean Penn. I highly recommend that movie. It's very interesting. Nicole Kidman plays an interpreter, but I believe in the film she speaks a couple of very specific dialects, but spoiler alert, the language that she speaks in the movie, it's actually a made up language. So the director of the film collaborated with a linguist, and they actually came up with a fake language
Wow.
from Africa, which was very interesting. But in the movie, you see her in the actual UN building. And so you see all the interpreters in these booths. And I would say, out of all the different types of interpreting, to me, that would be the hardest,
Oh yeah.
because you've got your headsets, you're listening to the main speaker, and then the people that are, sitting at the tables that may not speak English, you have to say word for word what the presenter is saying. So I honestly feel that people who do that specifically, you have to have a very specific personality to do something like that, because simultaneous interpreting is probably the most challenging, I would say. You wouldn't even have time to take down or jot down point form notes to do that kind of job, but highly recommend that movie. It's a very interesting film, and I think people who are into language learning would really enjoy it.
Yeah, that's a good one. And of course, you've got the UN over there in New York. We've got the EU in Europe with I think it's
Yes.
26 official languages. So they've
Yeah.
definitely got plenty of translator and interpreter work over there. And I think each country will have
Yes.
various languages in demand. I know that obviously in the US you have Spanish is a huge one. That'll probably
Yes.
get you lots of work if you have great Spanish skills. Some of the Asian languages as well, probably also in high demand. So definitely if it's a career kind of choice, I don't think you'd be struggling for work if you
Yeah.
learn two languages quite well. So it's a nice side quest.
There's also another website called Language Line Solutions, and they're always looking to hire people in the interpreting space. There's been some positive reviews about working for them. There's not been so great reviews, in terms of pay and salary. However, one thing that I notice for people if they are interested in pursuing a career interpreting, I've noticed that a lot of these companies aren't always looking for the popular languages. In fact, there's a lot of
Mm,
languages that are not very popular, or even dialects that you would have never heard of in your entire life, that are looking to hire interpreters for those positions. And in fact, if you do, or if you are learning a language that may be less popular or not necessarily that you would think would not be in demand, you'd be surprised. A lot of these companies are looking to hire people in the less common languages, and your chances of getting a job is much easier versus if you were competing with somebody for an interpreting job in Spanish or French or Mandarin. So, yeah, if you are learning a less popular language, there could be a very high probability that you could get a job very easily and much quicker in an uncommon language.
yeah. I don't think I would be able to get a job as an English interpreter in Denmark. I think they've got that covered.
Yes.
So that's great. Well, um, that's all I had for today. Mar. I really appreciate you being part of the event. This is the third time, so thank you for being a recurring speaker. And do you want to give people just a final little way to get in touch with you and learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, so you can find me on all platforms uh, at Sololingual. My website is sololingual.com. I've just started a YouTube channel, so for the new year, I'm going to be uploading YouTube videos because I know video is very popular as opposed to blogging. So I'm really looking forward to that. Other than that, yeah, if you can find me on social media and at my website, and you can reach out to me, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. And you can find all those links in the sidebar and leave a comment below. And I'm sure you'll check it out when you get a chance.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll see you in a future New Year, New Language.
Okay, thanks, Chris.